When my landlady traced her fingers along the railing that night, she wasn't asking for money. She was asking for something far more dangerous: my heart. I never expected the house I rented to feel like more than just a roof over my head. It wasn't fancy. An old two-story place with creaking stairs and ivy climbing the walls, but it had a certain warmth to it. Maybe that warmth wasn't from the house itself, though. Maybe it was from her. My landlady. She was the kind of woman you noticed without meaning to. Not because she demanded attention, but because everything she did carried a quiet grace. In the mornings, I'd catch glimpses of her tending to the garden, her hands brushing over the leaves, lifting her face to the sunlight like it belonged to her alone. She moved with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are. And yet, sometimes I thought I saw something else in her eyes. A stillness, a solitude. I'd only been living there a few weeks when I started picking up on these small details. The way she hummed faintly while watering her plants. The faint scent of lavender that drifted from her open window at night. The careful way she carried herself, as though she didn't want to burden anyone with the weight she carried inside. One evening, she asked me for a favor. The light bulb on the stairwell had gone out, and she needed someone tall enough to reach it. I agreed, glad for the chance to be helpful, though I didn't think much of it at the time. I remember climbing halfway up the ladder, unscrewing the dead bulb, when I felt her hand steady against my shoulder. It wasn't necessary, my balance was fine, but she left it there anyway, as if to reassure herself I wouldn't fall. It was such a small thing. A hand, resting lightly, her touch gentle but grounding. Yet the warmth of it spread through me in a way I hadn't expected. For a second, I forgot about the bulb, the ladder, even the house. All I was aware of was her nearness, the quiet steadiness of her presence. When I climbed down, bulb replaced, she gave me one of those smiles that feels both casual and meaningful all at once. "Thank you," she said simply, but her eyes lingered on mine just a fraction longer than they needed to. That night, lying awake in my room, I found myself replaying that moment in my head. The weight of her hand on my shoulder, the warmth of her smile. It was nothing, really, just a neighborly gesture, a passing glance. And yet, something about it stayed with me. It was the first time I realized there might be more to this house than ivy and creaking wood. More to her than the role of a landlady. And more to me than just a tenant passing through. It was the first uneasy glance at a story I hadn't even known I was about to step into. Evenings in that house always carried a strange kind of calm. The noise of the day would settle, the air would cool, and the scent of jasmine from the garden would drift lazily toward the porch. That's where I found her one evening, sitting with a pot of tea, the cups already waiting, as though she knew I'd eventually wander outside. "Sit with me," she said softly, motioning to the chair beside hers. I did, and in that simple act something shifted. It was no longer just landlady and tenant. It was two people sharing a quiet moment at the end of the day. The first sip of tea was warm, grounding. She asked me about my work, my studies, the things I wanted out of life. But she didn't ask the way most people did. With her, the questions weren't casual or polite. They were deliberate, as though she genuinely wanted to hear the answer. I found myself telling her things I hadn't even told friends my own age. About how uncertain the future felt. About how I sometimes wondered if I was moving too fast or not fast enough. She listened, really listened. Her eyes didn't dart away. Her hands didn't fidget with her cup. She gave me the kind of attention that makes a person feel seen in ways they didn't realize they needed. When the conversation turned to her, she smiled faintly, like she already knew I would ask. She spoke of her past not as a list of events but as fragments of memories. Some tinged with pride, others with regret. She laughed lightly about missed chances and then grew quiet when she spoke of dreams she had set aside. There were pauses between her words, and I noticed how much those silences carried. They weren't awkward. They were alive. As if in the spaces where she didn't speak, I could still hear her heart. The porch light above us flickered on, washing her face in a gentle amber glow. For a moment, she didn't look like a woman defined by age or responsibility. She simply looked timeless. The lines of her life were there, yes, but they only seemed to make her presence deeper, more real. At one point, she caught me staring. Not in the way a boy stares at beauty, but in the way a man stares at someone he feels connected to, even if he doesn't fully understand why. She didn't look away. Instead, a faint smile curved at her lips, as though she knew exactly what was happening between us but chose not to name it. The tea grew cold before either of us noticed. Neither of us hurried to refill our cups. We simply let the night stretch on, wrapped in words and silences that spoke louder than anything else. By the time I finally stood to leave, there was a heaviness in my chest. Not of sadness, but of wanting to stay. And as I turned to glance back at her, still seated on that porch with the warm glow of light framing her, I realized something had changed. This wasn't just a house anymore. And she wasn't just my landlady. She was becoming the center of every quiet thought I didn't know how to put into words. The rain that evening came suddenly, like the sky couldn't hold back anymore. It hammered the roof, filled the gutters, and turned the garden into a blur of silver. I had planned to stay in my room, maybe read or listen to music, but then I heard her knock, gentle, almost hesitant. She stood at the door with 2 bowls of steaming soup in her hands. "I made too much," she said with a small shrug. "Come join me before it goes cold." It was such a simple invitation, but my chest tightened all the same. The living room felt different that night. The soft patter of rain filled the silence between us, and the warm glow from the lamp made everything seem closer, more intimate. She had pulled her hair back casually, a few strands falling free, and her sleeves were rolled up. It made her look less like the composed woman I'd always seen, and more like someone softer, more reachable. We sat at the small dining table. I couldn't stop noticing the small things, the way her hand brushed the edge of her bowl as she spoke, the warmth in her laugh when I admitted I was a terrible cook, the way her eyes lingered on mine just a moment too long before darting away. At one point, she leaned across me to place the bread basket closer. Her hand rested briefly on my forearm, just for balance. It was nothing really, just a practical touch. But the heat of it burned through the thin fabric of my shirt, and I felt my breath catch. I didn't move, neither did she. For a moment, the only sound was the rain against the windows. Her hand was light but steady, as though she wasn't in a hurry to pull away. My pulse quickened, and I wondered if she could feel it beneath her touch. When she finally did withdraw, it was with the faintest smile, as if she knew exactly what had passed between us, but chose not to speak it aloud. The soup was good, though I hardly tasted it. My mind was too full of her, the cadence of her voice, the nearness of her presence, the way she tilted her head when listening to me. Every detail seemed sharper, heavier, as though the room itself had become charged with something unspoken. After dinner, she poured us both tea. The steam curled between us, and for a long while we said nothing. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was suspended, like the air itself was waiting for one of us to reach across the table and close the space for good. But neither of us did. Not yet. When I finally stood to leave, I thanked her for the meal. She brushed her hair back with one hand, her eyes following me to the door. "You're welcome," she said softly, her voice almost drowned by the rain. As I stepped back into my room, I realized my hands were trembling. Not from the cold, but from everything left unsaid between us. And in that trembling, I knew the boundaries between landlady and tenant were beginning to blur, and neither of us seemed eager to stop it. The rain had stopped by the time night fully settled in. The air outside was damp and cool, carrying the faint sweetness of wet earth. I had opened my window to let the breeze in when I saw her standing on the upstairs balcony, her figure outlined against the glow of the porch light. Something about the sight drew me out of my room. My feet carried me up the stairs before I could question why. She didn't turn right away when I stepped onto the balcony. Instead, she let her fingers trail slowly along the iron railing, as though tracing invisible lines only she could see. The movement was unhurried, almost deliberate, like she was gathering courage from the cold metal beneath her hand. Finally, she glanced at me. Her eyes caught the light, shimmering with something that wasn't quite playfulness, and wasn't quite sorrow either. "You know," she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough over the night air. "You owe me more than rent." I froze, unsure if I had heard her correctly. A smile tugged faintly at her lips, but there was tension there too, like she was both testing me and exposing herself all at once. She stepped closer, her hand still brushing the railing, her presence commanding without effort. "And I plan on collecting every last bit of it, tonight." The words could have been teasing, but they didn't feel like a joke. They felt heavy, deliberate, carrying something far deeper than what was spoken. My chest tightened. A part of me wanted to step closer, to answer her with the same boldness she had shown me. Another part held me back, weighed down by hesitation, by the unspoken rules that still clung between us. I managed a half-smile, trying to steady my voice. "And what exactly do I owe you?" Her gaze held mine, unwavering. For a heartbeat, she didn't answer. Then softly, she said, "Time, tension, maybe honesty." She paused, her expression flickering with vulnerability. "Things I've given away too freely before, to people who never truly valued them. But with you," she trailed off, letting the silence finish her thought. The night pressed in around us, filled with the faint hum of crickets and the distant drip of water from the roof. I could feel my pulse quickening, the railing cold against my hand as I unconsciously mirrored her stance. I wanted to speak, to tell her she had already collected more from me than she knew, that every glance, every touch, every quiet evening had already been hers. But the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I stepped just slightly closer, close enough to feel the warmth of her presence, close enough that the silence between us became electric. Her fingers stilled on the railing, her breath catching so subtly I almost missed it. And in that suspended moment, the world narrowed to just the two of us, standing under the dim light, balanced between risk and longing. I didn't cross the line that night, neither did she, but the confession had been made. And it hung between us, undeniable, waiting for the moment one of us would finally give in. The silence after her words felt heavier than anything I'd ever known. It wrapped around us like a second skin, making every breath, every shift of weight, every flicker of movement feel magnified. I could have stepped closer. Part of me wanted to, needed to. She was right there, her hand resting on the railing, her face softened by the golden glow of the balcony light. The night had quieted, leaving only the faint chirp of crickets and the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. But I didn't move. Something held me back. Maybe it was the fear of breaking the fragile balance we had been dancing around for weeks. Maybe it was the awareness of who she was to me. My landlady, yes, but also a woman older, wiser, with experiences that stretched beyond my own. I couldn't tell if I was protecting her or myself. She noticed my hesitation. I saw it in the way her eyes searched mine, as though looking for a door I wasn't ready to open. For a moment, I thought she might pull away, wrap herself back up in the armor of distance and leave me standing there with my confusion. But she didn't. Instead, she smiled softly, a small, almost wistful curve of her lips. Then she lifted her hand from the railing and let it brush against my sleeve. The touch was feather-light, barely there, but it was enough to send a shiver rippling down my arm. Her voice was quiet, nearly swallowed by the night. "It's all right," she murmured. "I can wait." That broke something in me. Not the hesitation itself, but the tenderness behind her words. She wasn't demanding, wasn't impatient. She was simply offering reassurance, telling me she could see my uncertainty and wouldn't hold it against me. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. I wanted to tell her that it wasn't about doubt, that it wasn't about her. It was about the weight of what this could mean, about how one step toward her felt like stepping into a fire I knew I couldn't walk back from. The crickets droned on, the air cool against my skin. And still, her hand lingered against my sleeve, a silent anchor keeping me from drifting too far into my own thoughts. Finally, I drew in a breath. "I'm just not sure if I should," I admitted. My voice felt rough, like it had been dragged through gravel. Her eyes softened even more. "Then don't," she whispered. "Not until you are." The words should have released me, but instead they bound me closer to her. Because in that moment, I realized she wasn't trying to trap me. She was giving me space, giving me time, giving me the freedom to come to her willingly. And that freedom made the pull toward her even stronger. We stood there for what felt like forever, our silence filled with all the things neither of us dared to say. The night was still, the air charged, and though nothing happened, everything had already changed. The night after our balcony conversation, I barely slept. My mind replayed every detail. Her hand brushing my sleeve, her soft smile, her words, "I can wait." It haunted me, not in a painful way, but in the kind that makes your chest ache with longing. I knew then that it wasn't just about attraction or curiosity. What I felt for her was something heavier, deeper, something that had already taken root. The following evening, I found her in the living room. The rain had returned, softer this time, tapping gently against the windows. She was curled up on the couch with a book in her hands, the lamplight spilling across her face. She looked up when she heard me, and for a moment, the entire room seemed to exhale. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, setting the book aside. I shook my head. "Not really." There was a pause, one of those silences that carried more weight than words. Then, with a small tilt of her head, she motioned to the space beside her. I sat down, the cushion dipping slightly between us. The closeness felt electric, though neither of us moved. The rain outside seemed to steady my nerves, each drop against the glass like a reminder that the world was still turning, even if mine had narrowed to this one room, this one woman. For a while we just sat. No forced conversation, no nervous laughter, just the comfort of being near. Then, slowly, almost cautiously, she shifted closer. Her arm brushed mine, the warmth of her body radiating through the thin space between us. When she leaned in, it wasn't sudden. It was gentle, unhurried, like she was giving me every chance to pull away. But I couldn't. Her arms slipped lightly around my waist, tentative at first, then firmer, as though she needed to know I was real. Her cheek rested against my chest, and in that quiet moment, I felt it. The steady rhythm of her heartbeat, strong and sure against my own racing one. I froze not from fear, but from awe. The simplicity of it struck me harder than anything else had. The warmth of her, the trust in that closeness, the unspoken surrender of walls she had kept so carefully intact. Instinct took over. My arms wrapped around her, holding her as if the act alone could answer every unasked question between us. She fit against me naturally, her breath soft and even, as though she had been waiting a long time to simply rest in someone's arms. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The embrace said everything, her vulnerability, my willingness, the fragile line we had both finally chosen to cross. The rain kept falling, steady and patient, as though blessing the moment. And for the first time since I'd moved into that house, I didn't feel like a tenant. I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt hers. The embrace lingered longer than either of us expected. Neither of us seemed in a hurry to let go. Her arms fit so naturally around me, and mine around her, that the rest of the world felt distant, unimportant. For once, I didn't think about rules or consequences. I thought only about the woman in my arms, the steady warmth of her presence, and the quiet surrender of a heart that had been waiting for someone to notice it again. Eventually, she pulled back just slightly, not away, but enough to look up at me. Her eyes held a softness I hadn't seen before, a fragile light that made her look younger, freer. She gave a quiet laugh, almost embarrassed, and shook her head. "You've caused me more trouble than you know," she whispered, though her voice carried no blame. I smiled, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "Then I suppose I owe you even more than rent now." That earned me a real laugh, low, warm, the kind that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. She leaned back into me, letting her head rest against my shoulder. And just like that, the moment transformed. It wasn't heavy or uncertain anymore. It was easy. We moved to the couch together, not out of need, but out of quiet agreement. She tucked herself against my side, her hand slipping into mine as though it had been waiting there all along. I traced my thumb gently across her knuckles, feeling the delicate strength in her fingers, and wondered how I had gone so long without this kind of closeness. We didn't talk about what came next. We didn't label it or define it. Instead, we let the silence speak for us, filled only by the rain outside and the steady rhythm of her breathing against my shoulder. After a while, she tilted her face toward me, her eyes glinting with that familiar spark of mischief. "Careful," she murmured, her lips curving into a teasing smile. "If you keep this up, I might start collecting rent in advance." I laughed, not at the words themselves, but at how natural it felt to be here with her, sharing a joke that belonged only to us. The tension that had once hung so heavily between us was gone, replaced by something calmer, steadier. An unspoken promise that neither of us needed to rush. I tightened my arm around her, pressing a light kiss against her hair. "Then I'll just have to stay a long time," I whispered. She didn't answer, not with words. Instead, she nestled closer, her body relaxing fully into mine, as if to say she wanted that too. And so we stayed there, two unlikely souls who had found each other in the quietest of ways. No fireworks, no grand declarations, just the steady comfort of knowing that whatever came next, we wouldn't be facing it alone. For the first time since I'd moved into that house, I wasn't just renting a place to live. I had found a home. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more slow burn romance stories. And let me know in the comments what part of their journey spoke to you the most.